Greetings students, I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course, and today I'm going to focus on chapter 12. And as you know, the title of chapter 12 is Social Constructivism. Constructivism is, again, one of the newest theories in international relation. Of course, you know, the term new for some people is kind of, very, very relative. Is that right? Constructivism, like feminism and the others, these are newer ones because we compare them with mainstream, theories. And you remember the three mainstream theories, all right? Realism, liberalism, and Marxism. Those are the oldest ones we have, and the oldest one of all is the, of course, realism, and then liberalism, and then finally Marxism. So what we are talking about here is another new theory that basically has found some gaps in the other three theories. Now, some people say that maybe it's acting like a bridge. We are going to kind of end our discussion with this one. But what I thought to do for you was, I thought the chapter was written pretty well. It has a lot of information, but also has so much details that what I was afraid was that you get lost in the details and you don't see the big picture. So I provided, a PowerPoint for you, as you probably noticed, for this chapter, that I try to jazz them up. I do not know if you notice or not. For each one of them, I try to have some, images, pictures, what do you call it? Flags, maps, things like that. Because I think when we look at something visually, we have a better understanding of it. Okay, so the first thing I should mention is what is the nature of this social structuralism. We can say that the social structuralism, as you notice, I put it on for you on that, slide number 2. Is that right? And it starts with a little, a picture of that individual from the study.com, website. This is what social, constructionism is all about. What I thought to emphasize is, what is it focusing on? Well, it focuses on a number of things. Number one, it focuses on norms and values. It focuses on institutions. It focuses on identity. It focuses on culture. And it focuses on all of these things in international relations. These are topics we usually would not cover, in international relation literature. Okay, so that's kind of interesting somebody is doing that. Now, if you notice, your chapter starts with what? With a Brexit example. Is that right? It's talking about Great Britain deciding to leave what? To leave, European Union in 2016 and everything. And then, you notice that, well, some segment of the, British society thought this is a, great idea. Some people, they thought it's not such a good idea, put it on referendum, and barely, basically, the idea was, yeah, let's leave European Union, and they did. And in fact, even when they were a part of European Union, they never were part of the Eurozone. They always used British pound anyway, So it was interesting that they did that, because your textbook is also communicating with you that the idea that the British who did that, they were actually receiving a lot more benefit from European Union, but the bottom line, what made the difference for them, or at least a lot of people who voted for it, is they thought, what am I getting out of this? Okay? Because when you're a big country like Great Britain, France, Germany, and you're a member of, such, organizations like this, you're basically putting a lot of your own money in there too. Is that right? To bring a sense of community, and here is the European community, okay? Similar values, similar this, similar that. But the British in that regard decided, I'm not suggesting they're bad or good or whatever, I'm just suggesting that they went through a process of thinking, that's maybe not us. And this is not like every single person over there, but just obviously enough people who voted that way. And that, you notice that your book is talking about that, and is comparing the British spirit with the German spirit. Maybe, I don't know, maybe because the Germans have been feeling so guilty because they started 2 wars, wars, World War I and World War II, is that right? So they're trying to be more giving, but, actually, the German, Deutschmark was one of the strongest, if not the strongest, currency in Europe, one of the strongest over there, and they've got used to, subsidizing this and subsidizing that and doing this one. And so from time to time, some segment of the German population says, why do we have to always do this? It's like, how come other people, they don't do it? But the bottom line is the German governments, regardless of who is in the power, right, left, center, whatever, they kind of agree and they do it. And I think the reason your book brought it up right there, and I hope that point is understood, is because the Germans, they have more of a sense of European spirit, maybe because they're continental, I don't know, whatever. I mean, I'm not an anthropologist to go and focus on that part of it. But I can tell you that they certainly, as book suggests, I agree with the book, that they have more of a European spirit that the British did, And interesting enough, the Irish, they decided they're going to stay, So they're there, so only UK has moved away. All right, so that's one of the examples. It starts with, again, to get the feeling that what is this social constructivism is all about, is all right? Then on the next slide that I put for you, I suggested, some of the assumptions, and one very, very important thing, according to social constructivism, assumptions are dangerous. Assumption of what? Assumptions, they're talking about assumptions of other theories, is that right? Because it says social constructivism is to avoid assumptions. Because when you have an assumption about something, already it's like you're wearing a pair of glasses that has a particular color, is that right? Like the ones that we wear outside, to prevent our eyes to get too weak from, the sunglasses or something. Each one of them, they come with the different colors, is that right? Green, yellow, blue, gray, whatever, is that right? It's like an assumption, because the way we are looking at it is we're not looking at the real thing, we're looking at the colored thing. And that's what the assumptions do according to constructivists, is that right? So assumption of the mainstream IR theories are their what? Weakness. This is, again, according to constructivists. And they say that assumptions prevent us from getting the full picture. It's just interesting because they talk about full pictures this way. I try to provide these lectures for you. They're short and sweet, and like you're getting into that to give you the big picture. So you don't get lost in the details, but at the same time, you have somewhere to go before you add more to it. One of the other things they talk about is neorealism, pluralism, and Marxism are all essentially the same. From what perspective of social constructivism? They say that they make assumptions which lead them to the weaknesses and to the misunderstanding. Interesting point of view. And also they talk about neo-utilitarianism, which is to describe, catch-all, realists and liberals paradigms from which the social constructivism was seeking to distance itself. I want to distance myself from realist and liberalism. The assumption that cooperative behavior is irrational and gain driven. That was the part that, if you remember, brought a realist and liberals together. But the constructivists are even criticizing that one, okay? They are presenting very, very different and unique ideas. Now, one of the other things that I wanted to put for you, and if you look at, for example, slide number 4, you see that there's the whole notion of agency and culture in IR, is that right? And I found something on internet to show you the relationship between what we call agency and structure according to what? Constructionists, is that right? So you might say, what is this? So agency is individuals' capacity to make an impact on society through their action. So in other words, when one particular individual, is that right? When we think about Gorbachev, what did he do? The last president of Soviet Union. He basically opened up, his society, and he started some kind of rapprochement, improved relationship with the West. Okay? So here we go. By him doing that, Cold War ended. Okay? It wasn't Ronald Reagan saying, oh, look, you know what? We as capitalists, we did whatever we could. Now we give up and we become socialist. Okay? And interesting enough, when Ronald Reagan was young, I know that we know him all as a Republican, and he was supposed to be a very strong Republican. Do you know when he was young, he was actually a Democrat in California? Okay. So what I'm trying to tell you is people, they change. Okay? People, they change. But right here, the main point of agency is an individual who makes an impact on the society. Okay. Then, what about the structure? Here, individuals' actions are shaped by society and environment in which he or she acts in. Okay? So, in that regard, they think that the structures determines behavior. Okay? So, we have the two sides. One side is individual agency making a change in the society. The other side, society, in this case, structure, changing the behavior of what? Individual. Okay. Now that we have it and we see the relationship between the two, social constructivists, they attempt to overcome this, agency structure dichotomy. They say we have to go beyond that. All right, this is just too simplistic. And they also talk about anarchy, that both realism and liberalism they're talking about is what state make of it. In other words, from their perspective, this is all man-made. For example, you wanted to see who has said something like that, a very, very brilliant, German philosopher, political scientist by the name of Alex Vindent. He mentioned that. I actually cited him over there, Then I thought, since he's such an important person in that regard, and his work in 1992 really brought a major shift in IR and everything, I actually put a couple of slides over there for you, because I noticed that the book has a little box for him. But I thought you probably want to know how this guy looked like, what are his ideas and everything. So the next couple of slides are actually introducing him. Alexander Vindent, I put his picture over there. He's a German-born political scientist. He was born in 1958, which probably the age of, basically some of your dads or maybe grandpas or something, depending on how soon they started having family. And then he talked about his 1992 article about anarchy is what, I think the title of the article was Anarchy is What States Make of It. Interesting. Okay. So then he talks about what is social constructivism. In that regard, I'll put a couple of boxes for you in different colors and everything, hopefully to get your attention. All right. One of the other stuff that, he has mentioned, and I thought it's kind of interesting to highlight it, is when social structuralism is talking about these similarities and dissimilarities with other point of views. Is that right? Like, for example, it agrees with the realist about the importance of structural level of analysis, and that international system is a state of, anarchy. That's what they say that it says. Is that right? So it disagrees about what structure is made of. Remember, from realist perspective, structure is anarchy. And anarchy leads to what? Look at the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint shows that one. The one on the second slide of, Alex. Is that right? Self-help system. And the self-help system leads into security what? Dilemma. All right. What about the Mendham, idea? Social conservatism. Structuralism is equal to socialization. Okay? Which can come from our education, or can come from upbringing, or can come from the society where we are living in. Okay? And how our society is formating us. And interaction creates a particular culture of anarchy. That's what it is. So here, it identifies three distinct cultures of anarchy. The Hobbesian one, the Lockean one, and the Kantian one. Okay, I'll put actually the pictures of these people for you as well, so you kind of get used to it. These are very important people to know. Okay, all right. So the three cultures of anarchy, according to these, are Hobbesians, a true realist self-help system. Hobbes is, in that regard, is one of the pioneers in that field, and realists love him. Okay, not all of them, but most of them. The whole notion is kill or be killed. Here we go. We have a realist perspective. All states identify each other as enemies. You see, it's a very black and white type of life. Lockean. States are rival rather than enemies. Live and let live. Sovereignty recognizes as a right to pursue national affairs. Okay? A milder approach. And then let's look at the last one. Kantianism. States regard each other as friends. Oh my God. First, they were enemies according to Hobbesian. Here, they're actually friends. Violence is not used to settle disputes in the 20th century, liberal democracies. Well, of course, they were talking about in 20th century. We are in 21st, which is a continuation of that. And then if you notice, in that slide, which is number 3 from Alex, actually you have a picture of him, his age, and all the other stuff. Anyway, I put all these things to make it a little bit more easier for you to digest. I hope it works. If it doesn't, some of these things do not work for you, send me an email. I'm doing all these things because I want to make sure that the course is a little bit easier for you to figure it out. If you like it, you don't like it, I hope that you're using some of those. I know some of you are using it because I read it and I try to modify those notions and bring it to some of my lectures. Some of you put some, ideas over there, in the, what do you call it, the weekly anonymous, as you noticed probably, the weekly anonymous basically surveys. And some people, they're so nice and not shy, and they send me a message. They said, Dr. Seti, this and that, I really like that one. Is there any possibility we can change it, this and that? And then if I see that a lot of students, they say that, then I contact the course designer because we don't do it all by ourselves. So right now, we check with course designer, and the course designers, they talk about the staff of the course development, people, and then we try to modify it as much as possible. All right. Like notice, for example, this course right now, these, video lectures that I make for you, they're much shorter than the ones that I had before. The ones that I had before, each one were like an hour and a half, okay? Now, some students, they still like that. They prefer that. But we notice majority of students, they prefer the shorter ones that highlights the main point, and then you go and read it yourself. Okay. The next notion that we need to, talk about is reappraising of the concepts according to constructivists. And in that regard, what are the main elements? So I identified the 5 main elements here for you. States and sovereignty, foreign policy making, identity, war, and security. Now, let's go and talk about each one of them separately. Here we go. First of all, about state and sovereignty. Again, I like to go back to the example we started with. Is that right? Brexit. The fact that some British, they were saying, you know what, I don't like our government to be taking order from, European Union. What is that? We have been always independent. We are going to make this. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm not saying this is right. Well, it's an opinion of some people, and they're living in a democracy, and they decided to vote for what? We want to be separate. Okay, fine. There was a time that they voted to be with a part of it. There was a time that they didn't. Why? Because the emphasis is on sovereignty. A nice French word that we are using it in English basically means what? Independence. Is that right? All right. And then over there, I also put for you, for example, some of the ideas that people who wanted to remain in, Brexit, and people who wanted to leave. All right. The next notion is the notion of foreign policy making. The example here I use is China. There was a time that China, has been traditionally referred to itself as the Middle Kingdom. What they mean by Middle Kingdom is like middle of the universe, some of the ideas that human beings have had over time that, they think, I'm the most important person, I'm the nicest, I'm the best, I'm this and that. Okay, in terms of, they accomplished quite a bit, but they used to think that they are the Middle Kingdom, it's like they're center of the universe, everybody's orbiting around them. So that's why there was a time that actually one of the, Chinese emperor asked his top, admiral, okay, take this ship and go around and see what do you see interesting. The guy goes around and sees parts of Asia, parts of Africa, parts of, Europe, and he comes back, he said, you know what, this is not something to write home about. Our own system is better. They burn all the ships. And after that, really, you don't see Chinese activity by ship because they built these things way before the British and the Portuguese and French and Spaniards and everybody else. You don't see them going somewhere else and establishing Chinese colonies the way the British and the French did. You see what I mean? This is very interesting. Nowadays, China is different. China's nowadays, this is the China that Deng Xiaoping changed it in 1978, 1979. Is that right? He changed basically that not workable socialistic so-called communist system to state capitalism. Is that right? And the China that we see right there has become the manufacturing for the world. Look at any products that we buy. Many of the products we buy, you turn it around, made in China. You go to Walmart, like 80% of stuff in the Walmart is made in China. The rest of it is India, Indonesia, this and that. Why? All the places that labor is cheap, okay? And they're also borrowing the technology from here and there to make it up. Now, one of the interesting examples in terms of foreign policy was while ancient China refused to go and be involved because they thought they are much better than everybody else and people in Africa, Asia, Middle East, and everywhere else. Nowadays, China has a policy of, they call it one belt, one road. basically renewing the ancient Chinese Silk Road. The Silk Road, as you probably know, is the road that was connecting China all the way through the Middle East, all the way to what? To Europe. And the Chinese products were coming to the Middle East, then with adding some Middle East product to it, or some of it were sold in the Middle East, and then the Asian product and Middle Eastern product would go to Europe. And then from Europe, also some of those stuff would again go back the other direction. Is that right? Of course, it was not like right now that, oh, let me order from my Amazon account, something, and then, it comes over there the next day. Is that right? I mean, you would bring some stuff and it would take years all the way from China to get to Europe, if it would ever get there. Sometimes some of these, caravans or something, they were being attacked by a bunch of, land pirates, for lack of a better term. Is that right? And they would kill all the people and take whatever it had. But sometimes it would survive that long road. So anyway, the Chinese are right now doing that. What they're doing is they're building infrastructure. They're building ports, railroads, airport, things like that. The advantage of it is the world is shrinking because there's going to be more activity, more trade, okay? Not the traditional one. So that's a kind of interesting thing. So in that regard, you can see subjectivity versus the objective factor of foreign policy decision making. I mentioned it in that particular slide. And they said the Chinese also have a tendency to think long term. We Americans, we have a tendency sometimes to think short term. I think maybe it comes out from our business practices. You know why? Because most of our companies, they say, what did we do last quarter? What are we doing this quarter? What are we going to do next quarter? The Chinese and also even the Japanese, they don't say this quarter, last quarter. Yes, they have to think about that one to make sure that they're generating enough money for what? For their investors. But they sit over there and they do something called industrial policy. They say, okay, in about 10 years, we want to build the best cars right there. Here we go. Right now, we have Tesla to build basically e-vehicles. Is that right? The Chinese, they have a product that most likely is going to take over what? All these electronic cars and everything. Because they have a system that you take the car, as opposed to go to a charging station and sit over there for even the fastest one, a couple of hours or something, or even half an hour. You go to a station, you bring your Chinese car over there, and then, they have already batteries charged up and everything, they put it over there. So in a matter of, it's just like 5-minute loop. You sit over there 5 minutes, it takes much faster to do that one, to even gas up your car. For the cars that most of us use, we go to a gas station and gas it up. Because you go over there, takes the batteries out, put the new batteries in, you go. You see what I mean? So with that type of technique, I would feel sorry for Tesla. Because, maybe Tesla in a few years is going to go bankrupt as soon as those Chinese cars, they start coming to US. Anyway, it shows their foreign policy has really changed. Okay, next one. All right, the notion of identity. The classical example in that regard is what? Is Yugoslavia. Now, you might say, what is Yugoslavia? Because you do not know what Yugoslavia is. But Yugoslavia used to be where right now a lot of those, countries like we call Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro was located, okay? It was a country that was put together by a number of different ethnic groups, and it had a hero, okay? Tito, General Tito used to be, who was actually Serb, is that right? He used to be the hero because he fought against this and he fought against that, and he tried to keep his country safe from the Nazis and this and that. And then socialism started going over there, and they started taking very pride of socialism and communism, and they had a special relationship with Russia, etc., etc. Better to say Soviet Union, okay, at the time, because I don't want you to confuse it together. So by the time World War II is finished, this country is put together, they're doing power sharing, because there are different ethnic groups. Yeah, there are all those ethnic groups we talked about, but Tito, a lot of people, I guess they respected him or something. They started doing power sharing, not to, respected him in that regard, and, power sharing in a way that make the system with all these diverse population to work together. And it was also socialist. And then his foreign policy became non-aligned. In other words, first he used to say, oh, our biggest brothers are the Soviet brothers and everything. Then he started saying, you know what? Moscow is making some mistakes. We don't have to follow exactly Moscow. Then he started opening up also what? Relationship with the West. So he was between East and West. You see what I mean? So that one worked out very well. Now, unfortunately, he dies. Everybody's going to die, is that right? Unfortunately, he dies. And what happens after that? Oh my gosh. the relationship between all those ethnic groups and the leaders who take over. They're a little bit nationalistic. They're helping a little bit more of the Serbs areas, where other people are paying taxes, but they don't see any kind of, changes in their life. So that system is what? Falling apart. And the nationalistic forces, they took over because of what? Economic and political factors which were involved. In that regard, the country becomes what? Disintegrated. So that's what they were talking about in terms of the identity, because national identity, obviously, and local identity had something to do with this particular factor from the perspective of what? From the perspective of a constructivist. Next one is the notion of war. So here the whole idea that, warlike democracies. Interesting enough, in the literature of international relation, there are some works that they suggest that democracies, they don't go to war with each other. But what here they are suggesting is that democracies might be not going to war with each other, but they're going to war with other people. Okay? And here the whole notion is that there's, constructivists suggest there is no grand theory. Might say, okay, so who cares there is no grand theory? Guess what? A lot of political scientists, a lot of IR scholars and everything, they've been always trying to create grand theories. Is that right? Like, what became realism, and then neorealism and liberalism and Marxism and feminism. All these theories were supposed to answer what's the meaning of life? What is happening in the world? You know what I mean? So they're all trying to, these guys, they say, no, we're not interested in something like that. So no grand theories. They're looking at they're criticizing the gaps that already exist in this mainstream theories of realism, liberalism, and Marxism. And they say that the reason there are those gaps is because culture can explain those gaps. Is that right? So they focus on culture. Remember, their focus has been always on values, norms, institutions, culture, things like that. And that's the tool they use to do that. And they said that the democracies, to a large degree, create their own enemies and their own friends. So they create these them versus us groups. Is that right? And by inferring either aggressive or defensive motives from the domestic structures of their partners, that's how things works out. This is basically the work of Rice. Okay. And what I wanted to do, his 1995 work, which was mentioned actually in your book, and I used it right here, but I added some other material to it. Now, having said that one, the next notion is the notion of security, which you already know. Is that right? I mean, every human society is supposed to protect itself. That is important. That's the essence of the work. Is that right? Okay, it's the essence of the work, but what we wanted to do is we want to make sure that security is not limited just to the time of war. We are not in war like 24/7. Is that right? 365 days a year. There are many times there is actually no war, but human society is still under a lot of pressure. So he has come up with the notion of human security. Is that right? And we talked about some of these things actually a little bit more, but I put actually a slide over there for you. Like if you look at like number 13, you see that I talked about security and human security, and I borrowed some of the topics of how human security is defined by what? By United Nations group and everything. So please get a chance to read it. I also put some information about, as noted in the General Assembly Resolution 66-290. Okay, so read that one. And even I put on the bottom of it, I put actually where I got the information. Is that right? Documented it where I got the information. All right. Having said all of these things, what will be the role of what? Social, constructivism. We can use the word of one of the famous political scientists by the name of Joseph Nye that has been actually listed in the Kigley's, world politics book. And he said, because he was not just a typical political scientist, he went actually to work in D.C. and just learn how things are getting done. He said, when I was working in Washington, it means Washington, D.C., okay? When I was working in Washington and helping formulate American foreign policies, I found myself borrowing from all three types of thinking: realism, liberalism, constructivism. Is that right? I found them all helpful, though in different ways and in different circumstances. So in that regard, basically, we're kind of back to the notion we started with, that some people, they refer to, maybe constructivism is acting like a bridge. Is that right? It's not perfect. No theory is perfect, guys. Which one of the theories we covered is perfect? None of them. Is that right? But it's acting like a bridge, and it adds to our understanding. And it fills up some of those gaps that are not answered by any of those mainstream. Okay. We are done with this one. I hope that you learned something from it, and please go ahead and reread the chapter a little bit better. Hopefully, you're using my PowerPoint, my lectures, and all the chapter summaries and everything that I put over there and organized for you to have a better understanding of what's going on. All right, and as always, whenever you have a question, you email me. You take care. Bye.